Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good morning, friends. Uh, Today I'm going to start with the lecture number 4 from the series. In the last lecture, I started the discussion on state aid. So, what we actually mean by the term state aid and why it is necessary to draw the distinction between various collateral terms, that is, state aid, grant, bounty, and mainly the core idea is to explain the subsidies and subsidies from the WTO perspective. State aid is something which is kind of very necessary support required from the government side. For example, if an industry wishes to shift its production mode, or let's say shift its use of energy from the nuclear setup to an environmental friendly setup, or maybe it wishes to draw a very big change, that is after the change in governmental policy, then it may require certain financial support from the government side, as it may not be possible for that industry or such production unit to take those initiative of its own. As you know that these things are very expensive. In that regard, the support provided by, or the financial support provided by the government, is termed as state aid. But one of the characteristics of state aid that distinguishes it from the subsidy is it is not meant for beneficial purposes. It is mainly concerning a support that is necessary, and without that, that its existence, the industrial existence, is not possible, or a vital change or a fundamental change in industrial setup is not possible. Mainly, this concept is used in European Union. As European Union does not follow the definition of subsidy, it has used this term state aid because European Union believes in giving financial support to the member states. It has both the political consequences as well as the economic consequences, because the idea was the European Union will keep on expanding itself, and the member states of the European Union, they were not in the same economic status. Some of them are quite affluent, but others are at a very marginal side, or let's say they are not very well to do either. So the thing is, then how can the European Union sustain if there is such a diversity? Like Germany is a rich country or a rich member state of the European Union. Sweden is another rich member. But what about countries like Greece or Romania and all these? Therefore, they coined the term state aid. So the European Parliament can give them financial assistance whenever they are facing those economic crunches. And then the next term is grant. Now, grant is something that usually the state provides or the government provides for any kind of an achievement, and that is also not for economic benefit. Like the grant is given to the students, grant is given to the hospitals. That is more of a charitable purpose, where we expect that something good is done in the society out of that grant. Next is the term bounty, which is an American concept. That is definitely for the purpose of benefit. That is a financial support given for attaining any economic benefit. Now, bounty is in literal terms considered as a reward. For instance, if an industry which is exporting, which has any business, export business, or let's say it is involved in exporting cloth or exporting cars, could be exporting pharmaceuticals or any such product, but the export graph is not hiking. Okay, it has saturated, or it is fluctuating between higher level to the lower level. So let's say the government initiates a policy where it announces that if this industry or any such industry increases its export, then they will get the tax exemption, or they may not have to pay income taxes or their export taxes likewise. So that is a kind of a reward being announced by the government in order to promote export sector or any particular export industry. So that is like a reward being given, and that is covered under the literal definition of subsidy. Next is subsidies under the WTO. Subsidy is very widely defined. Actually, it's not defined, but it is explained in terms of its characteristics in the WTO, because how you will define subsidy, it's a very complicated question, because whatever is given by the state can be of any kind of benefit, and therefore we do not categorize subsidy in terms of definition, but we define or we try to explain it in terms of its features for the WTO perspective. So the WTO has taken certain parameters, and based on that parameters it categorizes that these kind of state support will be considered as subsidy. Now, what are the three key characteristics it has taken into consideration for categorizing that state support to be a subsidy? One is there must be a financial contribution, whether it's in direct form or an indirect form. So financial contribution is one of the key feature for categorizing any state support as subsidy. But as I have explained to you, there is always the financial contribution is also in the case of state aid, it is also in the case of grant and bounty. Then how we distinguish between subsidies and these kind of state support? Therefore, we do have the common element financial contribution in all these categories, but then we need to search for some other features also that can make things more clear. So then the next term that is used, or the next feature that is used, is benefit. So any kind of financial contribution that is made by the government or given by the government must have an element of benefit. That means that benefit means an economic benefit or a financial benefit as a consequence of that financial contribution. That is these two are the key elements or the key features to categorize any kind of state support given by the state as a subsidy. That is one criteria adopted by the WTO. Then next is the procedural aspect. That is, if the state support is given, then it could be like there is a general announcement in this budget session, the government is going to give tax exemption to all the export industries. So can we consider that as a subsidy barred by the WTO? No. When it is of specific nature and the benefit goes for the specific industry, then we can say that now it should be barred by under the WTO regulation. Now, how that will be? For example, the government announces during this budget year that it is going to give certain tax exemption to the iron exporting industries, or those industries that are exporting cars. So there you can see that there is a financial contribution by the government in the form of tax exemption, and that financial contribution is definitely going to benefit that very industry. Secondly, that is for the specific group of or specific category of industry, that is either car manufacturing or an iron industry. So the three key elements or the three key features in order to categorize state aid as subsidy from the WTO perspective is financial contribution, benefit, and specific industry. Then only the action can be brought against that kind of policy framework or any such initiative that is taken by the government. So I briefly explain what it means by the financial contribution. Financial contribution simply doesn't confine itself to the money being paid by the government or any such physical measure adopted by the government, but it is of both direct and indirect form, and we can categorize it or we can further classify it in these form as it is classified under the WTO Subsidies and Countervailing Measure Agreement. a government practice involves a direct transfer of funds. Example, grant, loans, and equity infusion. So, first is that there is a direct transfer of funds from the government side. Maybe like the Prime Minister of India announces that there will be money will be deposited in the bank account of the farmers. Now, listen very carefully. If the money is deposited in the bank account of the farmers prior to their harvest, that is definitely a subsidy barred by the WTO. If the government announces that money will be given to the farmers or that will be deposited in the account of farmers after their harvest or when the crops have reached the market, that is not the subsidy barred by the WTO. So why it is the subsidy, that kind of subsidy is barred by the WTO, which is given to the farmers prior to the harvest, because at that time the goods have not even reached the market and we do not know the exact quantity of the goods. They are at a pre-market stage, but still the government has assured them some kind of financial contribution which is going to benefit it. So of course that is a policy measure and country do adopt such kind of measure, but I am explaining it in terms of the ethics of economics or the terms of the fair trade measures, whether we should adopt it or not, because by and large the burden of such kind of support measures being taken by the government will fall on the taxpayers. Now, one more thing I should add here, as I started the discussion about that is not the fair in terms of the economic values. The concept of subsidy that is adopted by the WTO has less to do with the free trade concept, because if you ask me the question that how it is that subsidy creates a deviation from the free trade or subsidy creates a hindrance from the free trade. So, because basically it is a government giving support to an exporter or to a producer, and that enhances the trade or that enhances the export. But subsidy as such, as a concept adopted in the WTO, has less to do with the free trade. Basically, it has to do with the fair trade practices. So, in yesterday's lecture, I was trying to explain the distinction between free trade and the fair trade concept. Now, why it is the subsidy is linked with the fair trade concept? Because the exact value that should be decided based on the market forces of that product cannot be decided because there is a government intervention. So, I explain it to you again. Like the exact value of the product is 100 rupees, and it can be sold in the market for 150 rupees. Now, by government giving the subsidy of 20 rupees, subsidy of 20 rupees, the value, the market value has gone down. Has gone down. It is now 130 rupees. But the question arises, who will pay the price? Basically, it is the government is giving that subsidy or state support, but the final burden lies on the taxpayer. Now, this product which I have quoted here, this can be in the form of industrial product or it can be an agriculture product. So, if the government is promising anything to the farmers prior to their harvest when the product has not reached, here in this case, actually we know that the real value of the product is 150 rupees. But in case of the crop, it has not been harvested or it is yet to come to the market, we do not know what will be its exact value. It could be it is affected by the rainfall, or the value is depreciated because of some infection or anything. But the government has given them the money. in advance. So that is where we need to cross check it, or we need to understand the things whether that is good economics or not. A government practice involves a direct transfer of fund that can be in the form of grants, loans, equity infusion. Now, grants already explained how loans do act as financial contribution. Now, if the market rate of a particular category of loan or particular amount of loan, let's say an industry is seeking loan worth 1 crore rupees, and if it is taking that amount from the open market, then maybe it has to pay 10% per annum interest rate. But the same amount, if it is seeking from the government, then the government is giving the loan for that particular industry in 5% or 2% or 3%. Although there can be a government fixed rate for the other industries which is higher than that particular industry. For example, if the government is willing to boost cloth industry this time for increase in the export of cloth exports, so maybe for that purpose the government has decided the loan being given to such an industry should be at a lesser interest rate in comparison to the interest being charged by the government for the other industry. So that is what it means here, the financial contribution in the form of loans. Equity infusion, where the government is purchasing the shares, intentionally purchasing the shares to give a boost to that industry or give support to the financial support to that industry. So that is what it means by equity infusion. Potential direct transfer of funds or liabilities. Now, there is also the concept of liabilities. If the government has accepted that whatever the cost industries has to bear to bring certain changes, or let's say to take the export risk. So, I mean, you can imagine that if an industry has just started exporting, so it goes through the various risk factors. It has to take into consideration various risk factors. But how that will be supported, or how that risk can be covered, until unless there is a support measure from the side of the government. So that is what it means. If the government is ready to take those liabilities, bear those liabilities, then that also amounts to financial contribution that finally can lead to the categories of subsidies, either prohibited or accepted. Next is government revenue that is otherwise due is foregone or not collected. Example, fiscal incentives such as tax credits. Government revenue that is otherwise due. That means if someone has taken the loan from any government institution, from any such society, and it has to pay it in the due course. So there can be two things here. Otherwise due is foregone. Like if I borrow money from any such government sector institution, and I have to pay back the entire amount with its principal and interest in 5 years. But then the government has decided, since my industry is performing good in export, so it has decided either to forego the entire interest, so only I have to pay the principal amount, or it could be the government has enhanced what I was supposed to pay in 5-year terms, now I may have to pay in 10 years. So that is because of the performance in export, or maybe the government sees that we should involve this industry in the production sector. So for that reason also the government is giving the support. So that kind of revenue that is otherwise due is foregone or not collected. That is also covered as financial contribution. Next is the government provides goods or services other than general infrastructure or purchases goods. The third form of financial contribution, as you can see, this covers now the indirect form. The first two were the direct form of financial gains being given to an industry, or the financial gains being sought by that industry. The third one is it provides goods or services other than general infrastructure or purchase goods. So it is usually expected that government will provide general infrastructure. Firstly, I would like to explain what basically is general infrastructure. Like near the industrial site, or let's say closer to the industrial unit, there is a requirement of proper road. Then that road should be linked to railway station or to port. And if the government promises it will do all this, it will construct a good road and also link that with the nearest railway station, and further link it with the nearest port. So that is like general infrastructure being constructed or supported by the government. That cannot be covered as a financial contribution because these are kind of state obligations or state duties towards its citizen. But what is something beyond that, like the government says it will provide free transport services for the goods being carried from that very industrial unit or manufacturing unit up till the port. That the government states there will be the vehicle support, or let's say the ship support being given to the industrial unit or to that manufacturing unit uh, free of charge, or maybe even providing at a concessional rate. So that is something where we see something extra is provided in addition to what we say as a general infrastructure. Other form of support that we see in this category is like reducing the electricity bills, or stating that there will be no electricity charges. Now, we have to draw the distinction here. Foregoing industrial bills, or foregoing electricity bills for the industrial unit is something that is considered as subsidy, but foregoing electricity bills for the citizens or for the people in general that are not involved in its commercial use, that is that electricity which is used for the residential purpose, is not covered in this category. So mainly it is for the industrial unit, the electricity, if it is given at a discounted rate or the bills are foregone, that will be covered as financial contribution, uh, not to be categorized under the general infrastructure support or purchases good. Now, in this case, it can be, let's say, there is a new car manufacturing unit coming up in India, and the government has, in order to give boost to it or in order to support it, government has accepted that they will buy 50% of the cars from that unit or from that industry and give it to the government officers that are working in the various sectors. So that is like purchases the goods. Why it is that will be considered as financial contribution? Because in the government sector it is expected that if there is a bulk purchase from any private sector, then that should be done by means of tender. Whoever quotes the minimum price and is ready to give the goods at a minimum price with best quality should be accepted, not arbitrarily being chosen that the government signs a contract with a particular producer or particular car manufacturer to deliver the cars for next 5 years of its production to the government. So that is something considered as financial contribution, which can be covered in terms of subsidies. Fourthly, a government makes payment to a funding mechanism or interest, or directs a private body to carry out one or more of the type of functions that in no real sense differ from the practices normally followed by government. So it could be that government itself is not involved in giving the financial support. It is discharging these functions or making or enabling any private institution to do this, and later on the government is fulfilling its obligation or supporting that private institution for whatever amount it has paid to an industry, paid to any such unit in the form of subsidy. Now that can be through the cooperative societies, or that can be through uh, sectors that are partly public sector and partly private sector, where the government does have its stake. There the government can, or the state, any such state can, through its policy discharge unit or through its policy mechanism, allow that private or semi-private sector or partly private, partly state sector to give support to any such industrial unit, to a farmer, or any such manufacturing concern, and later on that will be compensated by the government. So that is what it means here. That is, this clause has been included that with regard to the situations where things that cannot be done directly, sometime the state may try to do that indirectly, or sometime the state may try to circumvent what is not supposed to be done. So here a government makes payments to a funding mechanism or interest, or directs a private body to carry out one or more of the type of functions that in no real sense differ from practices normally followed by government. or there is any form of income or price support in the sense of Article 16 of GATT 1994. Now, these were at the top, or what I have explained earlier, they were the four features to know what basically we mean by the term financial contribution as defined for purpose of subsidies under the WTO. Now, apart from these four sub-classification, there is something also related to the GATT. Now, in my earlier lectures, I have stated that GATT is something which is still part of the WTO in general. And here the Article 16 of the GATT basically covers the explanation of subsidies in the GATT. So, in the GATT system, there was no separate agreement on subsidies. It was simply defined and further explained in Article 16 of the GATT. Then, since the WTO has adopted GATT, the entire GATT agreement, therefore, whatever was meant for explaining the subsidy has been taken as it is. So, if something has been left or something has not been covered as the above mentioned four features, then the rest can be taken from what has been explained in Article 16 of the GATT. So, what Article 16 of the GATT 1994 states? Here also what I am referring is very brief explanation of the subsidies under GATT. It has a very wide explanation, but comparing it with the WTO, it is still a very narrow explanation or very small explanation, because in WTO system, subsidy is covered in a separate agreement in itself in under Annexure 1A that covers multilateral agreement on sales of goods or multilateral agreement on goods. So, it is one part of that multilateral agreement. Whereas in GATT system, there it is not a separate agreement, but under Article 16 it is widely explained. So, that is the basic difference. Now, subsidies as is classified and defined in Article 16 is: if any contracting party grants or maintains any subsidy, including any form of income or price support, which operates directly or indirectly to increase export of any product from or to reduce import of any product into its territory, it shall notify the contracting parties in writing of the extent and nature of the subsidization. So, it says that if any contracting party grants or maintains, that means contracting party here is that of the GATT, those who have signed the GATT agreement, including any form of income or price support. They have not classified it in terms of financial gains, but simply stated if there is an income or price support which operates directly or indirectly to increase export. So, idea was how to put check on the government support measure for export industry or for boost in the export. Why it was? Because the government support being given to increase export means that we cannot assess what is the fair price of that export. So, that was the reason subsidy in the GATT agreement was barred for the export purposes. So, here it says to increase export of any product from or to reduce import of any product into its territory, it shall notify the contracting parties in writing of the extent and nature of the subsidization. That means if any state is providing that kind of support measure, then it must clarify it to the other contracting parties in writing that for what purpose it is giving such support and what will be its effect. Of the estimated effect of subsidization on the quantity of the affected product or products imported into or exported into its territory and of circumstances making the subsidization necessary. It also has to explain that for what reasons or for what under what compulsion it has to give that kind of subsidy or state support. Now, you see here how the export is affected by the subsidy. Price of and product, price of a product meant for export. Let's say that is $100, $20 subsidy. Now, the export price is $80. Now, what will be the effect? One effect will be the $20 of subsidy that is being given, the burden has to be shared by the taxpayers of that very country. Second is this $80 is the price of the product now. When it is exported, it will be facing competition with the other like products. Like if it is exported to country A, now there are other like products, and since the price had been depreciated or the price has been reduced because of the subsidy, other like products, they may their price could be $90 or $100. So this, the country which is selling the same product at $80 will be benefited. All right. So that industry or that country will be benefited because it is exporting the product at a lesser price in comparison to its competitor countries. But then what will be the other effect? That gradually they will be able to capture the market, foreign market, or they will be able to set up the monopoly. Although the burden for this $20 lies on the taxpayers of this very country. That is one effect. Now, the second effect of this subsidy sometime is, second effect, in case country A imports a product, that product is also produced in the country A, same product produced in country A also. Now, price of the imported product is $50, and price of the same product, that is like product, that is not imported but that is manufactured in country A, is, let's say, $55. All right. Let's take the example that there is a country which also manufactures the car and which also imports the car. So the price of the imported car is less than what is the price of the domestically produced cars. Now, in order to save that industry, the domestic industry, or to enable the domestic industry to survive the competition with the foreign cars, what it will do, it gives subsidy. Okay, here in this case it gives subsidy of $10. The price goes to $45. The price of the product goes to $45. So then, if there is a competition between that imported product and the like product that is manufactured in the home country, the home country will get edge, or they will be benefited out of it. But how that benefit has been created, or under what circumstances the same product that is produced in the domestic market or in the home country gets benefited, that is because of the subsidy of $10 here being provided by the state. Now, this $10 subsidy has again the effect on the taxpayers, but apart from this, what are other things affected? That it creates an artificial price of the product, that is not the fair price, but an artificial price of that product is created, which is not fair. And secondly, we will never be able to know what are the natural forces, market forces, deciding the demand and supply of this very product. So that definitely in the long run creates a very bad economic impact on the society and the market. So if, in order to explain these things, the GATT kept keeping in mind that it is promoting free trade, therefore it wanted the conceptual change to be brought in the policy framework of the market, the conceptual change in the financial sector to be made in the states. So that is why it clarified it in this term, rather than going into the various features of subsidies. It simply stated, If any contracting party grants or maintains any subsidy, including any form of income or price support, which operates directly or indirectly to increase exports or of any product from or to reduce imports of any product into its territory, it shall notify the contracting parties in writing of the extent and nature of the subsidization, of the estimated effect of the subsidization on the quantity of the affected product or products imported into or exported from its territory, and of the circumstances making the subsidization necessary. Now, the last part is states subsidization necessary. So, that means there can be instances where the state support is necessary. Now, or it is inevitable, like I have explained to you when we discuss the concept of state aid. Since the WTO has not, or neither the GATT has taken into consideration what do we mean by the term state aid, but they have tried to classify the same subsidies in various categories. In some categories, it can be considered as justifiable, in some categories, it is considered as non justifiable. So, therefore, when subsidization is considered necessary or state support is considered necessary, it can be exempted. We cannot put that in the same type as it is meant for subsidies for export, subsidies for giving support to the domestic industry when it is in competition with the foreign like producer. So, please be very clear, if the subsidy is given to a domestic industry, that is not prohibited under the WTO system, but if the subsidy is given to a domestic industry when it is in competition with the like foreign producer selling the same product in that very particular country, then it is barred. So, here subsidization when it is necessary is accepted, or it is not considered as barred under the WTO system. Why it is so? Because when the WTO has classified the state as developed, developing and less developed, and also it has set its objective in the preamble itself that to create opportunity for all the nations, raising the standard of living, that opportunity for trading for all the nations, whether they are developing and less developed, cannot be created until unless there is an initial state support. So, that initial state support by and large is in the form of subsidies, but then that has to be exempted from those categories that are meant for profit earning. So, if the subsidy is being given by the developing country and less developed country at a formative stage or at a very nascent stage of an industry, that is exempted from the prohibited category, and that is considered as subsidization for necessity. So, that was kind of a classification being done under the GATT system. In any case in which it is determined that serious prejudice to the interest of any other contracting party is caused or threatened by any such subsidization, the contracting party granting the subsidy shall, upon request, discuss with the other contracting party or parties concerned, or with the contracting parties, the possibility of limiting the subsidization. Now, further, what the GATT agreement Article 16 has included, that in case, of course, they have mentioned that there can be subsidies based on necessity, but let us say if that means there is a scope of giving subsidy, if that kind of state support is being given, but it has a serious consequences, or it creates some negative consequences to an industry of another country, all right, then whether that another country whose industry is affected because of the subsidies being provided or the state support being provided by any other country has a chance to dialogue, or has a chance to ask to reduce the subsidies, or to know whether is it necessary to give such kind of state support. For example, country A is giving state support to its industry, to its export promoting industry, or industry that has just begun, and that is affecting industrial units in country B. So, whether the country B has the right to discuss this issue with country A, since it is being affected by the state support being given by country A or not. So, that kind of situation is discussed here, which is discussed basically in Article 16 of the GATT. In any case which it is determined that serious prejudice to the interest of any other contracting party is caused or threatened by any such subsidization, the contracting party granting the subsidy shall, upon request, discuss with the other contracting party or parties concerned. So it can be either one party that is affected, it can be multiple parties, two parties, three parties that are affected by the effect of this subsidy, or parties concerned, or with the contracting parties, the possibility of limiting the subsidization. So they can state that you should reduce the amount of subsidy or reduce the time period of that state support. The contracting parties recognize that the granting by a contracting party of a subsidy on the export of any product may have harmful effects for other contracting parties, both importing and exporting, may cause undue disturbance to their normal commercial interest, and may hinder the achievement of the objectives of this agreement. So it has been already accepted that basically the export promotion subsidies are most crucial thing, and that was also recognized when the GATT agreement was signed. That is why it is clearly stated in Article 16, the contracting parties recognize that granting by a contracting party of a subsidy on the export of any product may have harmful effects for other contracting parties, both importing and exporting. So it can be in both the cases, the effect can be seen in both the cases, whether the country is importing the goods or exporting, and may cause undue disturbance to their normal commercial interest, and may hinder the achievement of the objectives of this agreement. So that is also leading to long term their commercial interest because of this subsidy, and it may hinder the achievement of the objectives of this agreement. The achievement of this agreement, objective of this agreement are promotion of the free trade, and in case the state keeps on pushing its goods in export market by giving subsidies, that means it is reducing the opportunity for the other countries exporting the like goods. Secondly, that will not allow the fair value of the product to be decided by the market forces. And thirdly, we deviate from the principle of most favored nation clause, we deviate from the principle of the national treatment principle, where the product from the foreign market or from the foreign country has to be equally treated or has to be treated at par with the like product domestically produced. Next term is benefit. Now this benefit term is part of the subsidies explanation under the WTO. It talks about the benefit. Benefit is thereby confirmed. So financial contribution simply is not subsidy. Financial contribution can be a grant, financial contribution can be a state aid. But for it to be classified as subsidy, there must be a benefit out of that kind of financial contribution. So the two things has to be clubbed together when we try to create any such category, or we try to put any such state support in the category of subsidies. The two things has to be taken into consideration together, that is financial contribution and next is benefit. Now such like distinct classification was not done in the GATT. That is why the GATT simply made the explanation about what it means by the subsidies and why it should be restricted. So here we have the benefit. Otherwise, the financial contribution, if it is without benefit, then it can be in the form of state aid, it can be in the form of grant. But if it has the benefit feature, then it is kind of support being given to an industry with some economic consequences, with some economic advantages. Now that economic advantages can have two distinct things. One is it creates a market distorting effect, and secondly it does not allows the product to know its fair value. We will never be able to know what is the fair value of that product. The third thing is specificity. Now these two criterias are, or let's say these two features are mainly meant for the subjective purpose or for subjectively defining the subsidies. But the third one, the specificity part, is mainly for the procedural aspect. That is to know who is really benefited out of this policy, or who is really benefited out of the financial contribution. If it is meant for a specific group of industry, then we will be able to categorize that this particular industry is benefited out of this government policy, and now we should put check on it. So therefore, in order to make it very clear that which industry is benefited, the term specificity was also added while making classification of the subsidies. So first one is financial contribution, second one is benefit, and the third one is specificity. For example, if government gives a tax bonus to all the exporting industry, that does have the element of financial contribution, that does has the element of benefit, but it is not confined to any specific industry, it is to all the export industries. So in this case, we will not be able to challenge it before the WTO, because we do not know who all are the competitors, who all are the beneficiaries out of it. All are beneficiaries. But if it is mainly to iron industry or to cloth industry, that is where we come to know it is clearly meant for these industries, and that is in order to earn more of the export. So that is how the procedural aspect of the WTO tries to classify it in a more particular manner, the effect of the subsidies. Next is types of subsidies classified. First one was explanation of the subsidy, or kind of definition part, although it was not in true sense the definition, but a detailed classification of the subsidy. Next one is the types of subsidy under the WTO agreement. This is in case of the WTO agreement, which was not in the GATT system. So first one is prohibited subsidy, defined under Article 3 of Subsidies and Countervailing Measure Agreement. Next one is actionable subsidy, defined under Article 5 of the Subsidies and Countervailing Measure Agreement. The third one is non-actionable subsidies, defined under Article 8, which is basically obsolete. It is no more functional, or we rarely take this into consideration, what is non-actionable subsidy. Now, what are the types of, how we determine a subsidy as prohibited? Prohibited are those categories of subsidy that are void ab initio. That means there cannot be any scope to deviate from its negation or deviate from the restriction. It is simply a clear bar on the government that they should not frame any such policy measure within this category, within the prohibited category, or no initiative should be taken in the prohibited categories. No such initiative for state support should be taken in the prohibited category subsidies. Next one is actionable subsidies. They are the subsidies that are permissible, but that permission being given is only for to that extent that it does not have any market distorting effect. It does not affect the fair competition among the goods from various countries, or it is not prejudicial to any like industry of a foreign country. So that is actionable subsidies. I'll come to these in detail later on. The third one is non-actionable. That means there is no such bar or no such restriction on these kind of, or these categories of state support, although they are no more in function. But in order to draw the distinction, or in order to clarify the kind of support measure being made by the government, we still use this for classification purposes. Now the first one is prohibited subsidy. That is subsidies contingent in law or fact, whether solely or as one of several others. That is contingent in law or fact. Contingent in law is if any such law is framed that covers the kind of subsidies categorized as prohibited, that kind of subsidy. That means if the law is enacted that is meant for giving any prohibited subsidy, cannot be initiated or cannot be framed. Or fact, that means the law has not been created, law has not been enacted, but the facts and circumstances states, or the facts of circumstances speaks for itself that the kind of state support being given falls under the prohibited category. So that can be covered under Article 3, prohibited category subsidies. whether solely or as one of the several others. So it could be that the solely it is that kind of state support is of prohibited category, or it could be partially it is of prohibited category, partly it is of actionable category. Conditions upon export performance, including those illustrated in annexure 1. Now, one of the major categories of prohibited categories are subsidies meant for export promotion, and that mainly listed under annexure 1 of the subsidies and countervailing measure agreement. So what kind of subsidies are under prohibited category? Mainly that are meant for the purposes of export, and that is included in the list mentioned in annexure 1 of the subsidies and countervailing measure agreement. Now, another criteria that is set for the subsidies to be considered as prohibited, that is local content subsidies, that is subsidies contingent upon the use of domestic goods over imported goods. That means if in country B goods are imported, let's say television is imported, TV sets imported, and likewise TV sets are also manufactured in this country B. Also manufactured. Now here the country B is giving state support to boost its domestic product or domestic manufacture of the television set. That has to be, or that will be more preferred by its consumers. So in that category where local content or there is a boost to the local like product when it is in competition with the export of that product, in that case we consider that as a prohibited category. So here the government is providing subsidies to the domestic television set producers. Now this domestic television set producers are in competition with the imported television sets, and as a consequence of it, as a consequence of this subsidy, the customers or the consumers will prefer to go for the domestically produced television sets because they are cheaper. And that they are cheaper is not because they are more, the producers are more efficient, the producers are of good quality or they have more skills, but here because the government is giving subsidies to the domestic producers of those television sets. So the local content subsidies, or where the idea is to promote the domestic producers, that is completely prohibited. Next one is export subsidies that are prohibited. Now one category that is listed in annexure 1, where we have detailed list of in what cases if the state is providing export subsidies, that is supposed to be prohibited. Otherwise, in general, it is export subsidies except as provided in the agreement on agriculture, subsidies contingent upon export performance, including those illustrated in annexure 1. So all those export subsidies that are prohibited. Now one more thing, except for the one that is meant for agriculture purposes, because there is a separate agreement on agriculture products or agriculture in general, so it covers the kind of export subsidy there. Now one more thing that has to be very clear with the people in general, that prohibited category subsidies are barring any kind of state support, but there is a relaxation in case of developing and less developed countries. So if a developing nation has just initiated an industry or has just started into an export market, so naturally they will not be able to compete with the like products of the developed country at the initial stages. In that cases, they are exempted from such a strict definition, or let's say such a strict clause of prohibition. But then there are two restrictions further in this, that up till what time period those developing nations or less developed countries can give the export subsidies, and secondly what should be the amount. So that has to be made very clear, because the idea is not to create any trade distortion from that part, or the developing nation giving the export subsidy at the end of the day produces trade distortion. That should not be the effect, but only it should be in order to promote or give some kind of scope or create the space for the developing and the less developed nation to make certain contributions in the international trade. Next one is actionable subsidies. No member should cause, through the use of any subsidy, injury to the domestic industry of another member. Now, as the term itself states, it is actionable subsidy. That means it is not void ab initio. Like in case of prohibited subsidy, it was very clear that the state cannot give that category of subsidy, neither it can frame any policy of such nature. But in actionable form of subsidies, the state is not barred, but after a certain point of time they are restricted. So we can say that this is more of a regulatory nature. That is why when I started this discussion on subsidies, one thing was clear, that subsidies are of two categories. One is where we try to justify it, or subsidies that are based on necessity, that are exempted from the prohibited category, and the other form of subsidies that are based on, let's say, export promotion. They are totally prohibited. So we need to draw the distinction between justifiable use of subsidy, or the subsidies that are of justifiable nature, and the one that are of not justifiable nature. So there is a very narrow margin between it, because when the justifiable category will fall into an unjustifiable category, that we do not know, or maybe sometime we know but we intentionally do so. So here, that is the reason the WTO has included in its agreement actionable form of subsidies, where initially those subsidies are justifiable or they are acceptable, but at later stages the same may be considered as unjustifiable. So here it is actionable subsidy. No member should cause, through the use of any subsidy, injury to the domestic industry of another member. That means it should not be given to such an amount or to such an extent that it creates an injury. That means it affects in economic terms to the domestic industry of another member. Nullification or impairment of benefits accruing directly or indirectly to other member under GATT 1994, or serious prejudice to the interest of another member. Now I explain it. First is injury. Injury here means, in economic terms, decrease in profit, or it could be leading to loss. Now when this can happen, it can be like if there are two countries, country X and country Y. Now country Y's economy is heavily reliant upon exporting its goods to country X. All right, and country X has just started manufacturing the goods of a particular kind, and it is providing subsidies. Okay, so far as it is giving infrastructure support to its industry, so far as it is giving state support for the basic purposes, there is no such negation or there is no such restriction. But if the country X has started giving subsidies to the extent that the goods that were exported from country Y to country X here, that has now decreased, or it is decreasing to the extent of being wind up. Now the country Y has to wind up its exports from country X. Now anyone can argue with me why it is so bad, because every country has to develop its industry. It is not denying development of industry. It says that you can provide state support, you can give justifiable subsidies up till the nascent stage, you can give the infrastructure support, but after that infrastructure support, in order to meet the market competition, or where there is a price difference between the product from this country and country Y, in order to reduce the price gap, or in order to allure the consumers of country X that they buy their own domestic product and reducing the price of that product, that homemade product, will negatively affect the price of this product from country Y, or it will have a negative consequences to the producers from country Y. So that is what it means, injury to the domestic industry of another member state. Next one is nullification or impairment of benefit accruing directly or indirectly to other members under the GATT 1994. Now, what is nullification or impairment? Thank you for giving time. I'll continue with this in the next session.